With a lot of the changes and shifts we're seeing in the design industry right now can feel really overwhelming. I think it's important to also come back and remember some of those foundational skills and looking at your overall process. And sometimes the foundations are there. You're just going to have to mold them and make them into your own. Hi, for those of you who haven't met me, I'm Pavi. I've been a designer for nearly a decade, working across companies like Capital One, Shopify, and Okta. And I'm here to share templates and frameworks that have worked for me day to day, and hopefully they help you in your practice too. Often when you're working in a fast-paced environment and projects are just taking off quickly, you literally just have to hit the ground running, and it's really hard to figure out some level of structure. One of the biggest challenges can be working on projects and trying to mold your process depending on what the project needs. And you might be working with a new team and trying to figure out how to collaborate with them. Collaboration is one of the essential skills a designer needs. There's, of course, so many foundational skills that you need, but collaboration can truly make or break your experience. This is a skill that you carry throughout, no matter where you are. And when I'm talking about collaboration, I'm talking about the teams that you're working with. I'm talking about maybe other designers. You're working with a product manager, you're working with engineers. These are a lot of different stakeholders that you're working with. So how are you going to collaborate with them, and how are you going to scale that? I was working on a fast-paced project and we were just hitting the ground running without actually a process in place. And I need to take a step back and actually figure out how I can help us collaborate more better so that we can work more efficiently. I designed a really basic template that you could probably use. And if that works for you, let me know that. Let's jump right in. So I actually used Figma to build this out. And this was just a very simple presentation that I put together. But how I broke it down was primarily talking about my design process, jumping into how we can work together and having room for discussion at the end. I actually worked this into a 30-minute presentation, and you could totally make this template yours based on what you want to do. So I first started off by walking through some primary guidelines on how I wanted to approach this project. I was working on an AI tool, so there were some things I wanted to shift and change a little bit. I spent some time actually dialing into my process, and this would be at a very high level, I would say, because obviously depending on what the needs are, those things can change. So you can definitely modify this based on how you want to work and how you want to work with your team. For this specific project, because we were moving quickly, I wanted to really highlight working Scrappy, because sometimes you can get lost in making sure you have all of those details narrowed down before you actually start shipping work. And sometimes that doesn't work based on timelines. You need to work iteratively. So I broke this down into talking about how Scrappy doesn't necessarily mean you're careless. It's just talking about how we focus on the intent over perfection, and that we're shipping to learn and not to finish. I also like to talk about how I personally like to show up to build. And again, this can definitely dramatically change now that you probably might be using AI tools in your workflow. So talking about how that actually fits into the bigger picture and how you actually want to collaborate with your engineering team on that too. And I also like to make sure I cover what my expectations might be and opening this up for discussion as well. And just to also hear the team's feedback on how they might want to work with you. Everyone's favorite topic is trade-offs and blockers. And how I phrased this was, let's actually talk about trade-offs and options versus talking about blockers, because when you're in a discussion and someone's raising their hand saying, we can't do this, let's first understand maybe why. And two, let's talk about what are some of our other options, and is this a trade-off, and let's measure those pros and cons. Ambiguity is coming across a lot in projects that you might be working on. And I think it's really important to focus on what sort of progress you can make over waiting and slowing things down. So one of my favorite things to do is to make sure that we're documenting assumptions so we have something to anchor ourselves to. And then usually I like to wrap up with talking about what success could look like if we put this into practice. At the end, I would leave some room for discussion. Specifically, what I like to do for this was, if you have time, you can jump into a quick collaboration board and you can just really narrow down on how you want to work together. I know you might be looking at this and thinking, I don't know if I have time for this. This is a lot of work. This feels fluffy. Yeah, it can feel that way. But I think this is really important to actually narrow down, especially when you're getting into larger projects or you're taking on more responsibility. This helps you have a framework to actually work together. And when you're working on projects where there's multiple stakeholders, you might be working with a lot more people, it can get really hard to have these guiding principles that set the foundation for how you can actually work effectively together. This provides you with a baseline to actually get your project from 0 to 1. I personally prefer having these discussions right at the start of the project. And sometimes if you're already further down, it's not too late. In this case scenario, we were already further down, and I actually paused to reflect and thought this would be an effective way for us to work together. I think the most important thing here is how you approach it. And approaching the discussion of collaboration in a collaborative way can also set you up for success in how you work with that team. By you doing this, you're taking ownership and leadership over your own work. You can do this and approach it in a way of influence without authority. So try this out and let me know if it works for you. If you're interested to learn about any specific topics, let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you soon.